I spent the entire day in a whirlwind of anticipation and careful preparation, each moment brimming with hope for a special evening that I had long envisioned. Today was not merely any night. It was the moment I had chosen to share a deeper part of myself with Brian in his cozy New Orleans apartment. In the quiet solitude of my room, I meticulously planned every detail, from the outfit that would best express both my elegance and genuine self to the subtle accessories that would catch the light just right. I remember standing before the mirror, studying my reflection, feeling a mix of excitement and vulnerability that only a cherished promise of intimacy could evoke. The thought of entering Brian's world, the familiar space where our memories once danced so effortlessly, filled me with a tender longing. I recalled previous evenings when the soft glow of lamplight and the gentle hum of the city outside created an atmosphere of warmth and connection. My heart raced with anticipation as I imagined the scene. Arriving at his apartment, the air infused with a quiet comfort, the scent of familiar cologne mingling with the aroma of home, I could almost hear the soft greeting I had been longing for, a welcome that would erase all the mundane worries of the day. As the afternoon waned, I felt a surge of excitement that was both exhilarating and intimidating. I had spent hours choosing the perfect dress, one that spoke of my inner strength, yet revealed a delicate side rarely seen. Every detail mattered to me. This was not just about appearances, but about offering a piece of my soul. I wanted Brian to see the effort, the care, and the honest desire for a connection that transcended the ordinary. In those moments, the city of New Orleans, with its rich tapestry of history and culture, felt like a silent partner, encouraging my every step. Walking out the door with my carefully gathered belongings, I couldn't help but wonder if tonight would finally mark a turning point, a seamless blend of love, trust, and the possibility of a future unburdened by past uncertainties. Yet there was a quiet part of me that hesitated, knowing that even the most perfect plans sometimes hide unexpected twists. I tried to quiet that inner voice, embracing the hope that this evening was meant to be everything I had dreamed of. With each step towards Brian's apartment, my heart beat a little faster, and my mind filled with both memories of cherished moments and dreams of what was yet to come. I was ready to step into a night that promised both comfort and the gentle thrill of something beautifully unpredictable. I stepped into Brian's apartment, my heart beating with the familiar rhythm of hope and anticipation. However, as soon as I crossed the threshold, a subtle shift in the atmosphere made me pause. The living room, which I had always regarded as a sanctuary of shared memories, now seemed to hold secrets in every corner. Almost immediately, I noticed a delicate fragrance lingering in the air, a scent that was unmistakably not mine. It was soft, elusive, and oddly persistent, as if it were a silent testimony of someone else's recent presence. I moved slowly through the space, my eyes absorbing every detail. On the back of a chair, draped casually over the edge, lay a light, airy garment that clearly did not belong to me. It was the kind of piece that evoked fleeting elegance, something one might wear on an unhurried afternoon. Its presence here, in a place where I expected only our shared history, sent a ripple of uncertainty through my thoughts. The familiar lines of the room now carried a strange weight, a quiet hint that things were not as they had always been. As I continued my careful exploration, my senses picked up on more subtle clues. A book lay open on a small table, its pages slightly ruffled by a gentle breeze that I hadn't noticed before. The sight was peculiar. I remembered Brian tidying the room meticulously during our previous visits. Even a coffee mug sitting precariously on the edge of the counter caught my attention. It was half full, as if left in haste, an interrupted moment frozen in time. These were not the small quirks of an everyday life we once shared, but rather unexpected markers of something unfamiliar taking shape around me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the apartment was narrating a different story tonight, a narrative that did not include me. The delicate balance of order and warmth that I had always known seemed to be punctured by these tiny, yet significant anomalies. Every misplaced item, every subtle scent, whispered to me of interruptions and unseen presences, forcing me to confront a disquieting possibility. Standing in the softly lit hallway, I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I felt as if the space was urging me to piece together its hidden message, each detail a fragment of a larger, unsettling puzzle. My heart ached at the thought that my cherished sanctuary was now layered with unknown memories, and I felt the first stirrings of doubt creeping into my mind. The apartment, with its once familiar decor and comforting layout, had suddenly become a canvas for an unfamiliar story, one that hinted at secrets I had never imagined might exist. In that moment, I realized that every carefully chosen detail of my evening was now overshadowed by the subtle signs of intrusion. The air seemed thicker, the silence more profound, as I grappled with the realization that the comforting haven I had always believed in might have been silently invaded. The weight of this new awareness pressed upon me, setting the stage for a confrontation with a reality I was not prepared to face, but that I knew could not be ignored. After the unsettling discoveries in the apartment, I stood quietly in the living room, the soft echoes of my footsteps merging with the city's distant hum. The atmosphere had shifted, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the familiar warmth of this space was slowly turning into something unrecognizable. My thoughts were suddenly interrupted when I heard the door click open. Brian returned from his brief walk, but the moment he stepped in, I knew something was off. His entrance was subdued. No warm smile or enthusiastic greeting greeted me. Instead, he appeared with a tentative, almost hesitant posture, his eyes briefly scanning the room before settling, or rather avoiding settling, on mine. The usual sparkle of familiarity in his gaze was replaced by a quiet reserve, and the air around him felt heavy with unspoken words. I felt as if an invisible barrier had sprung up between us the instant he walked in. I tried to muster a welcoming smile, yet his response was distant and clipped, as if he were merely fulfilling an obligation rather than sharing in our planned evening. His footsteps carried a noticeable weight, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost reluctant, and lacking the genuine tone I remembered so well. "Hi," he said, his tone devoid of the usual affection that had once been a constant comfort. I noticed how his hands fidgeted at his sides, betraying a subtle inner turmoil that he tried desperately to hide. As he moved through the room, I could see the tension in his every motion. He seemed to be avoiding the spaces that held our memories, the cozy armchair where we had once sat together discussing dreams, the coffee table that had been a silent witness to our shared laughter. Every detail about his demeanor suggested that something within him had shifted profoundly. I searched his face for clues, desperately hoping to catch a glimpse of the warm, reassuring Brian I once knew, but instead I found only a guarded expression, eyes that darted away whenever I attempted to make a connection. The silence that stretched between us was punctuated only by the soft clink of his keys and the rustle of his jacket as he set it down with deliberate care. I felt an unfamiliar chill creeping into my heart as I wondered if his changed mood was a reflection of something that had transpired, a hidden conversation, an unspoken decision, or perhaps a moment of weakness he was unwilling to share. His reluctance to engage, the guarded way he responded to my questions about his walk, all hinted at secrets that hovered uncomfortably in the air. In that moment, I realized that every detail, the lingering scent, the misplaced garment, his hesitant steps, was converging into a painful narrative that I had tried so hard to ignore. My mind raced with questions and doubts, while my heart sank under the weight of the unspoken tension. I longed for an explanation, a moment of honesty that could bridge the growing distance between us. Yet, as I looked into his troubled eyes, I sensed that the truth was locked away, hidden behind layers of fear and regret that neither of us was ready to confront. I found myself drifting toward Brian's study later that evening, the silence of the apartment urging me to seek answers hidden in plain sight. My heart pounded as I sat down on the edge of the sofa, unable to shake the eerie feeling that something was amiss. The earlier clues had left me restless, and now I sought a confirmation that would either dispel my doubts or force me to confront a painful truth. With trembling hands, I picked up his phone, hesitating for a moment before deciding that understanding the unknown was more important than preserving comfort. As I navigated through the familiar interface, each swipe and tap was accompanied by a sinking sensation in my stomach. Then, there it was, a message from a woman named Jessica. The name rang a bell, one that I recognized as an old family acquaintance whose presence in our lives was usually benign. Yet the context of the message was anything but ordinary. The words on the screen were candid and filled with an intimacy that I had never imagined sharing between Brian and someone else. Every sentence carried an undercurrent of connection, a shared moment that had clearly taken place without my knowledge. Reading the text, I felt as though the air around me had thickened, and a numb shock replaced the lingering hope of reconciliation. The message detailed an encounter, a conversation, and even a fleeting kiss. A brief, irreversible moment that shattered the facade of the life we had built together. I reread the lines over and over, each repetition etching the betrayal deeper into my consciousness. The casual tone of the message belied the magnitude of its implications, and it seemed almost surreal to reconcile the warm, familiar Brian with the man who had allowed this chapter of his life to unfold without my presence. In that moment, a cascade of emotions overwhelmed me. The quiet acknowledgement of his misstep was both a relief and a crushing blow. I realized that the gentle, reserved demeanor I had witnessed earlier was not just a fleeting anomaly, but a manifestation of a regret too heavy for him to bear. The painful truth crystallized in my mind. Trust had been compromised in the most subtle, yet undeniable manner. The discovery marked the beginning of a profound internal reckoning, one where every shared smile and whispered promise was now reframed under the stark light of betrayal. Sitting there with his phone in my hands, I felt a deep solitude settling in, a loneliness born not only of his infidelity, but of the shattering of a bond I had once believed unbreakable. This message was the turning point that altered the course of our story, transforming cherished memories into echoes of something irretrievably lost. With a heavy heart, I began to understand that the life I thought we had was now fractured, and I would have to gather the scattered remnants of my trust to forge a new beginning. I could no longer keep the weight of uncertainty to myself. With the incriminating message still echoing in my mind, I gathered every bit of courage I had left and confronted Brian. I found him in the dim light of the living room, sitting quietly on the sofa as if lost in thought. The moment our eyes met, I saw a flicker of something, a mix of regret and resignation, that told me he was aware of the gravity of the situation. "Brian," I began, my voice barely a whisper, yet laden with the pain of all that I had discovered. "We need to talk." My words, though soft, carried an intensity that demanded an answer. For a long heartbeat, the room was silent except for the sound of my own pulse echoing in my ears. Finally, he nodded slightly, the gesture both an acknowledgement and an admission of what was to come. Sitting down across from him, I could feel the tension that had built up like an unspoken barrier between us. He avoided my gaze at first, his eyes fixed on some distant, unreachable point. I pressed on gently. "I saw the message, Brian. I saw your conversation with Jessica." The truth was out, and there was no turning back now. His face hardened with a mixture of sorrow and defeat as he let out a quiet sigh. I made a mistake," he said, his tone uncharacteristically subdued. The admission was simple, almost casual, yet it resonated with the enormity of what had transpired. He confessed that on one lonely day, he had allowed himself to be led astray by a moment of weakness, a mistake that he now deeply regretted. I listened, every word piercing the fragile shell of hope that I had clung to for so long. There was no elaborate explanation, no dramatic outpouring of emotion, just a calm, measured confession that contrasted starkly with the storm raging inside me. "Why, Brian?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Why did you let it happen?" He looked up then, meeting my eyes with a raw honesty that was both heartbreaking and illuminating. "I lost myself for a moment," he replied quietly. "I thought I was alone, that I wasn't enough. But that's no excuse." His words tumbled out in a hurried murmur, as if he were trying to dispel the tension with swift brevity, knowing that the damage was irreversible. For a brief moment, we sat in the heavy silence that followed, an acknowledgement of betrayal, regret, and the painful truth of our shared reality. There were no more justifications, no further debates. The conversation had become a simple, stark acknowledgement of a betrayal that neither of us could undo. I realized with a sinking certainty that no amount of explanation or remorse could repair the breach that had been created. In that brief conversation, everything changed. The warmth and familiarity that had once defined our relationship were replaced by a cold clarity. I could see now that some mistakes, however fleeting, leave marks that time cannot erase. With every word, I felt the finality of the moment, a silent understanding that the life we had known was now forever altered. In the aftermath of our brief conversation, I found myself adrift in a sea of memories, each seemingly trivial detail from the day now imbued with a heavier meaning. Wandering from room to room in the quiet aftermath, I began to trace the outline of our life as it had unfolded that day. Every small moment, a gesture, a glance, a pause, was now a bittersweet reminder of the time before everything had irrevocably changed. I recalled the soft ring of my phone in the early afternoon, the call that had pulled me away from a moment of quiet reflection. Even the way the light had filtered through the sheer curtains as I dressed for the evening now seemed laced with an irony I could not escape. At that time, I had believed that every minute was a step toward a night filled with possibility. Instead, I was left holding fragments of ordinary moments that, in hindsight, betrayed a hidden complexity I had been too naive to suspect. Sitting at the kitchen table, I remembered the precise moment I had glanced at the clock and felt the day stretching out, heavy with unspoken promises and secret uncertainties. The mundane details, the way the kettle had whistled, the distant hum of traffic from the street below, even the rustle of the newspaper pages as I absent-mindedly flipped through them, now carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. Each of these details, once so familiar and comforting, had transformed into quiet echoes of a life that seemed to be slipping away. As I moved through the apartment, I couldn't help but focus on the subtle shifts that had occurred in our everyday routines. I remembered the small smile that had briefly flickered on Brian's face during a passing moment in the morning, a smile I had taken for granted as an affirmation of our connection. Now, that smile was tainted with an ambiguity that made my heart sink. The gentle clink of his keys on the table, a sound I had always found reassuring, resonated with an unsettling familiarity. Every seemingly insignificant detail of the day wove itself into a tapestry of recollections, each thread pulling me back to moments of bliss and to the creeping dread of what I had discovered. The comforting cadence of our daily lives, the ritual of shared coffee in the quiet hours, the unspoken exchanges of knowing looks, was now fractured, each small memory a reminder of how trust had been eroded bit by bit. I recalled the way his hand would sometimes brush against mine, a fleeting contact that once conveyed affection, but now stung with the knowledge of betrayal. Even the way the afternoon shadows shifted across the hardwood floor felt like a silent testimony to the irreversible passage of time. In these recollections, I sought not only the comfort of familiar routines, but also an understanding of how the ordinary could harbor such profound loss. Every echo of laughter, every casual word exchanged, all served as a poignant contrast to the weight of the confession I had heard earlier. As I pieced together these seemingly minute moments, I began to realize that the small details of our day, once trivial and unremarkable, were now indelibly marked by the shadow of betrayal. Standing in the quiet of our once shared space, I felt the full force of a day that had started with hope and ended with irrevocable change. The gentle rhythm of daily life had been interrupted, and every small moment, from the simplicity of a morning ritual to the unassuming details of an ordinary afternoon, had become a silent witness to a loss that ran deeper than words. In this intricate web of memories, I was left to navigate a landscape of love, regret, and the painful beauty of what once was, knowing that each moment would forever carry the imprint of that fateful day. In the aftermath of our painful conversation and the cascade of disjointed memories, I felt an overwhelming need to reclaim what remained of my identity. The apartment, once a cherished sanctuary, had turned into a space where every corner resonated with the echoes of betrayal. The weight of what had transpired pressed upon me until I realized that clinging to the remnants of a shared life would only hold me back from healing. In that moment, I made the choice to leave, not out of anger or regret, but to restore my sense of self. I moved slowly through the now unfamiliar space, gathering my thoughts as I began to pack a small bag. Every item I picked up carried a memory: a scarf that once draped over my shoulders on a cold evening, a framed photograph of happier times. Yet with each piece I also felt the sting of loss. I paused at each step, the act of packing becoming a quiet ritual of letting go. I was not just leaving a physical space, but the version of life that had once defined my world. The decision was both heart-wrenching and liberating. As I closed the door behind me, the sound was a final punctuation, a declaration that I was ready to step away from the past. The familiar streets of New Orleans, bathed in the muted glow of twilight, now seemed to offer a path forward rather than a reminder of what I was leaving behind. With each step away from the apartment, I felt a subtle lightening of the burden I had carried all day. In the solitude of my journey home, the cool night air wrapped around me like a gentle embrace, whispering promises of renewal. I allowed myself to feel the full spectrum of emotions: sadness for what had been, gratitude for the lessons learned, and a burgeoning hope for the future. The city, with its unpredictable rhythms and soulful music, became a silent companion on my path to rediscovery. Every familiar landmark, every corner I passed, evoked both memories and the assurance that I was now writing a new chapter. As I walked along the lively streets, I reflected on the significance of this turning point. It was not a retreat from love, but an assertion of self-respect and the courage to rebuild. I knew the road ahead would be uncertain, and healing would not come in a single step. Yet, in that quiet determination, I discovered a resolve to nurture my own heart and embrace the possibility of a future where trust, once lost, could be slowly rediscovered in its own time. With each step, I felt a renewed commitment to reclaiming my identity, one built on resilience, self-awareness, and the quiet promise that every ending, painful as it may be, holds the potential for a new beginning.